So let's ask a very difficult, even dangerous question. Why is America, the so-called bastion of democracy and liberty, openly aligning with a country like Pakistan, which has harbored terrorists, suppressed minorities, and shown blatant hostility to one of the world's largest democracies, India? Now, this isn't just about geopolitics. This is about how the world works. And unless we understand this, we're going to continue confusing rhetoric for reality. Let's break this down. When we speak about nations, especially powerful ones, we often speak in symbols. America is seen as the land of liberty, the global policeman, the defender of democracy. But when we start to peel away those symbolic layers and look at history not as myth, but as record, a very different story begins to unfold. Because if we're honest, brutally honest, the United States has never, not once, sustained a foreign policy based purely on shared moral values or ideological alignment. Instead, what emerges is a cold, consistent pattern of strategic convenience, a preference for nations and regimes that serve an immediate tactical purpose, even if those regimes are undemocratic, oppressive, or violent. And this isn't conjecture. It's not conspiracy. It's historical fact. Look at the US record in Latin America throughout the 20th century. Dictatorships were propped up in Chile, Guatemala, Nicaragua, not because those leaders believed in freedom or human rights, but because they were anti-communist, and that alone made them friends. In the Middle East, brutal monarchies and theocracies have long been embraced, not because they treat women equally or allow dissent, but because they provide oil, bases, and strategic alignment. Now, apply that same lens to South Asia. Ask yourself, why was the United States so invested in Pakistan during the Cold War? Why did it continue military and financial aid even as Pakistan drifted further into authoritarianism and extremist alliances? The answer is simple and painful. Pakistan was useful. It bordered the Soviet sphere. It gave the US a foothold near China. It offered a channel into Afghanistan. And in the end, that usefulness trumped any concerns about democracy, religious extremism, or terrorism. Let's not forget, during the Afghan War of the 1980s, the US armed and trained militants in Pakistan who would later turn into the Taliban. And when those same forces began to destabilize the region, America's strategy didn't change, it simply evolved. The equation stayed the same. If a partner gives us access, information, or leverage, we'll support them, no matter the cost to their people or neighbors. That cold realism is hard to accept, especially when the propaganda speaks of values. But the reality on the ground tells a much more cynical story. And this is where emotion starts to enter the equation. Because if you're from a country like India, if you've seen democracy tested, preserved, and strengthened through chaos and pluralism, you might expect recognition, even partnership, from the so-called leader of the free world. But you don't get it. You get lectured, you get pressured, you get compared. And worse, you watch as billions flow to your neighbor, a country that has harbored terrorists, suppressed dissent, and manipulated global sympathy to shield itself from accountability. And you ask, why? And the answer is infuriatingly cold, because usefulness trumps righteousness. It's deeply disorienting when you grow up believing that international relations are governed by fairness, that democracies stand together, that the arc of history bends toward justice, but reality bends toward power, and power plays a different game. It doesn't see morality, it sees opportunity. And this is where a kind of emotional fracture begins to take hold. You feel betrayed, you feel unseen, you feel like your country, despite doing the hard work, holding elections, protecting speech, upholding courts, absorbing diversity, is constantly judged by standards no one else is held to, while the same countries who sponsor extremism are rewarded with aid, weapons, and diplomatic immunity. It isn't just unfair, it's insulting. And this pattern isn't accidental, it's systemic, because moral consistency is expensive. It requires sacrifice, and global superpowers don't sacrifice. They calculate, they invest, and they abandon investments that no longer yield high returns. That's why today, when India asserts itself, when it refuses to be told who to trade with or how to vote at the UN, it isn't celebrated, it's challenged, because independence is only admired when it doesn't interfere with someone else's dominance. This is the great disillusionment of modern diplomacy, that support isn't given to the honest or the strong, it's given to the pliable, the predictable. Pakistan remains in many ways a client state, desperate for Western backing and willing to play the long, dangerous game of appeasement and strategic illusion. And in return, it gets what it needs: funds, arms, attention. Meanwhile, India, standing firm, gets questioned. So when you ask why America supports Pakistan against India, don't look for moral answers. Look for utility. Ask who provides access to Afghanistan. Ask who acts as a counterweight to China's western frontier. Ask who is more easily influenced and who dares to walk alone. That's your answer. It's not comforting, but it's the truth. Because in the end, the world doesn't reward virtue, it rewards leverage. And until we accept that, we'll keep waiting for justice from a system that was never designed to deliver it. When people ask why America still leans toward Pakistan, despite everything, despite the evidence, despite the history, despite the double games, the answer isn't hidden in secrecy, it's hidden in plain sight. Geography, pure and raw geography. That small, chaotic piece of land wedged between Iran, Afghanistan, India, and China is not just a country. It is a bridge, a listening post, and more than anything else, a strategic pivot in the world's most volatile region. It's easy to overlook this. We want to believe alliances are built on friendship, shared ideals, human rights. But behind every alliance, especially ones involving superpowers, lies cold strategic logic. And in that logic, Pakistan has always held enormous value, not for what it stands for, but for where it stands. You can criticize its internal instability. You can question its sincerity. You can even call out its links to terror networks. But what you cannot deny is its location. And in international politics, sometimes location is everything. To the west, Pakistan borders Iran, a country constantly at odds with U.S. interests. To the northwest, it shares a rugged, porous boundary with Afghanistan, a nation that has been the epicenter of American military focus for over 2 decades. Just above that, you find a strategic corridor into Central Asia, and to the north, it touches the western front of China, a region deeply sensitive in Beijing's eyes, and a possible point of leverage for any nation that wants to peer into China's vulnerabilities. That's the unspoken calculus. Pakistan provides proximity, the kind of proximity satellites can't replicate and airstrikes can't replace. You want to monitor Taliban movements after your withdrawal from Afghanistan? You need Pakistan. You want access to intelligence on Iran's border dynamics? You need Pakistan. You want to know how China manages unrest in Xinjiang? Right across the Karakoram, you need Pakistan. And when you need someone that badly, you overlook their sins. Now, this is where the pain deepens. Because while Pakistan has embedded itself in these regional chessboards, India has played a far more principled game, investing in diplomacy, trade, multilateral cooperation. But the reward for principle, it seems, is silence. The reward for utility is privilege. Let's go back to 2001, after 9/11. America launched its war on terror. Who became the frontline ally? Not India, the largest democracy that had long suffered from terrorism itself, but Pakistan. And why? because Pakistan gave the CIA its corridors, its airspace, and at times even its silence. It became the launch pad for drone strikes, the supply route for American troops, and the informal back channel to militant networks. It was dirty, yes, but it was effective. Even when Osama bin Laden was found literally living in the shadow of Pakistan's military elite in Abbottabad, America's outrage was brief. There was shock, there was condemnation, but then the cycle resumed. Because the truth is, Washington couldn't afford to isolate Pakistan. It couldn't afford to lose that access. And when access becomes everything, accountability becomes nothing. This is the paradox that countries like India have to live with. That a nation hosting the architect of 9/11 can still receive billions in aid, that a state accused of arming extremists across borders can still be called an essential partner, and that the very victims of those extremists, nations that have bled from these encounters, are still told to show restraint. It's maddening and it's humiliating, especially when your own sacrifices, whether in Kashmir, Mumbai, or Pulwama, are met not with solidarity, but with vague calls for dialogue, as if terror was just a misunderstanding, as if state-backed violence could be excused for the sake of balance. But again, this is not about justice, it's about geostrategy. The American military-industrial mindset sees the world in terms of zones, access points, airspace, corridors, and in every war game, Pakistan is positioned as an indispensable square on the board. It may be unstable, but its instability can be managed. It may be duplicitous, but that duplicity can be exploited. And most dangerously, it may be unpredictable, but that unpredictability for some in Washington makes it more pliable than a self-assured, independent India. This is the bitter irony. The more responsible a nation becomes, the less it is indulged. The more reckless a nation is, the more it is courted. Because recklessness creates dependency, it makes a nation easier to control. And that control, or overt, is often more valuable than genuine partnership. So when the world watches the US sign defense agreements with Pakistan or release aid packages or remain silent when Pakistan crosses moral red lines, it's not an endorsement of those actions. It's not a mistake. It's a deliberate cost-benefit calculation, one that prioritizes leverage over loyalty. And that's what makes this so hard to swallow. Not just the betrayal, but the clarity of it. It's not hidden, it's not disguised, it's broadcast in press conferences and funding announcements, all wrapped in vague diplomatic language. Words like stability and regional peace are used to justify decisions that, in reality, perpetuate violence and imbalance. But the deeper pain lies in the realization that morality doesn't drive these decisions, necessity does. Pakistan, for all its contradictions, remains a necessary partner to the world's most powerful nation, and India, with all its promise and patience, is too strong to be controlled and too independent to be relied on as a pawn. That's the calculus. That's the ugly logic behind American support for Pakistan. It's not friendship, it's not admiration, it's a trade-off, and in that trade-off, principles are the first casualty. It's one of the most devastating realizations a person can come to when they grow up believing in ideals. The idea that morality on the global stage is often little more than theater. You're taught that justice is universal, that human rights are non-negotiable, that democracies stand together, and that the world condemns evil when it sees it. But the deeper you look, the longer you watch, the more you begin to understand that the real driving force behind foreign policy is not virtue, it's leverage. This is where a lot of people struggle, emotionally, intellectually, because they want to believe that powerful nations, especially those who preach values so loudly, live by those values when it matters most. But time and time again, the mask slips, and beneath it, you see the machinery of interests, of backroom deals, of alliances that are not rooted in shared ethics, but in cold convenience. Look at the world's recent history. The United States, the most vocal advocate of democracy on the planet, has backed military coups, funded dictators, and partnered with regimes that routinely silence, imprison, and even execute their dissenters. It has supported apartheid South Africa in the past. It stood by Saudi Arabia through bombings in Yemen. And in Pakistan's case, it has funneled billions of dollars into a country that has both harbored terrorism and exported it. So when people ask why America supports Pakistan despite everything, they're not asking a strategic question, they're asking a moral one. And that's where the emotional pain begins. Because they're not looking for tactical reasoning, they're looking for fairness. They're asking, consistency matter? Doesn't consistency matter? Don't alliances based on shared suffering and shared principles count for anything? And the answer, as heartbreaking as it is no. Not in the real world of geopolitics. Not when decisions are made in high security meetings, behind closed doors. In that world, morality is a tool, useful when it aligns with national interest, disposable when it does not. And this isn't a one-time betrayal. It's a pattern. It's a system. Pakistan, despite everything it has done, sheltering Osama bin Laden, turning a blind eye to extremist camps, fueling cross-border violence, has rarely faced long-term consequences. There might be a brief statement of concern, a few weeks of diplomatic scolding, a temporary aid freeze, but then it's back to business. Why? Because Pakistan provides something more valuable than trust. It provides access. It offers unpredictability that can be managed, chaos that can be channeled, and in many ways a kind of dependency that makes it easier to manipulate than a sovereign, self-assured power like India. And what about India? A nation that holds regular elections, a country that has remained, for all its internal flaws, a functioning democracy under constant stress, a civilization that has endured not only colonialism, but decades of economic hardship, regional instability, and cross-border terrorism. What does it get? Often skepticism, interference, conditional friendship. It's painful to see your country, with its hard-earned legitimacy, treated like a swing vote when your neighbor, who plays both sides of every conflict and fuels many of them, is called a strategic partner. It's even more painful when the world turns a blind eye to your suffering, because calling it out would disrupt a convenient alliance. That's the cruel paradox of international relations. You would think doing the right thing earns you favor. You would think that respecting sovereignty, upholding democratic norms, and fighting terrorism within your own borders would earn you global recognition and support. But more often than not, it earns you lectures, scrutiny, and unrealistic expectations. And you start to see the pattern that moral consistency is a luxury powerful nations only indulge in when it's safe, when it won't cost them too much, when it doesn't interfere with their larger objectives. Otherwise, it's sidelined, dressed up in press releases, but quietly discarded in actual decisions. And that's where the disillusionment sets in, not because you were wrong to believe in principles, but because you discover that those in power don't actually share your belief. They only mimic it when it serves them. This is not just an intellectual frustration, it's an emotional wound. Because countries like India don't want handouts, they want honesty, they want fairness, they want to be treated with the respect that their history, their resilience, and their sacrifices deserve. And yet they are constantly reminded through every press conference, every deal signed behind their backs, that they live in a world where morality is negotiable. That's the hardest pill to swallow. that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee support, that choosing democracy over dictatorship, dialogue over violence, and stability over sabotage doesn't earn you loyalty from the international community. What it earns you often is isolation, because the world doesn't reward nations for standing on principle. It rewards them for being useful. And when your usefulness comes from chaos, from volatility, from crisis, then your flaws are tolerated, even protected. That's why Pakistan can be a safe haven for extremist groups and still be treated as a partner. That's why even after decades of exporting instability, it gets invited to global tables, while India is asked to justify its every move. It's not about truth, it's about terms. And those terms are written by power, not principle. And yet, despite it all, India endures. It continues to walk the harder path because it still believes stubbornly in its place on the side of history that values order over opportunism. That is its strength, and it may also be its burden. But make no mistake, the myth of moral consistency is just that, a myth. And until more people begin to recognize it, they'll keep waiting for justice from a system that was never built to deliver it. There's a quiet discomfort in Washington, Brussels, and other Western capitals, a tension that grows every time India makes a decision that doesn't align neatly with their expectations. And this discomfort isn't born out of India doing something wrong. It comes from something far more threatening to the old way of doing things. India refusing to be told what to do. Because for decades, the global order has operated with an implicit assumption. Nations that need the West will fall in line. They'll vote how they're told at the United Nations. They'll shape their economies to fit Western models. They'll buy weapons from approved lists, criticize the right enemies, and applaud the approved allies. That's how the game has been played. But India doesn't play that game. India has emerged as one of the very few nations that can speak to both the East and the West without begging either for approval. It trades with Russia, even when pressured not to. It signs defense deals with France and the US while maintaining close ties with Iran. It refuses to take sides in proxy wars. It doesn't allow itself to be dragged into ideological confrontations. It makes decisions based on national interest, not Western narratives. And right there in India, and that independence, it bothers people. Because when a country like India, the world's largest democracy with 1.4 billion people and a rising economy, decides to act autonomously, it exposes the hollowness of the West's moral high ground. It proves that success doesn't come only by following their prescriptions. It challenges the belief that leadership means obedience. And it breaks an old pattern because, let's be honest, many developing nations have been conditioned to think that alignment with the West equals survival. That without aid, without loans, without favorable trade, their futures are uncertain. But India isn't begging, it's negotiating. And more importantly, it's walking away when the terms are not in its favor. That's rare, and that's powerful. But it's also the reason why India isn't celebrated in the way you'd expect, why despite its vibrant democracy, it often receives more criticism than praise. Because the West, at its core, still prefers reliable allies over strong ones. And reliable doesn't mean trustworthy, it means predictable, manageable, compliant. And India is none of those things. When India abstained from votes at the UN related to the Russia-Ukraine war, it was called out, not because it was enabling violence, but because it refused to parrot the Western script. When India continued importing discounted oil from Russia to protect its economy and its citizens from inflation, it was accused of undermining solidarity. But solidarity with who? And at what cost? India made a choice, an unapologetically Indian choice, one that said, our people come first. We will not sink our economy for the sake of optics. We will not follow the herd into a crisis. That kind of decision-making unsettles the West because it shows that their approval is no longer the global currency it once was. That shift in power dynamics is emotional. It rattles old assumptions. For decades, foreign policy in the global south was dictated, not discussed. But India is changing that, not just with words, but with action. It's building its own trade corridors. It's investing in regional alliances like BRICS. It's connecting with Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, not as a junior partner, but as a peer. And that's why when you ask why America supports Pakistan more openly than India at times, the answer isn't just about Pakistan's geography or history. It's about India's refusal to be owned. America has always preferred partners it could steer. Pakistan has been, for all its strategic contradictions, easier to sway. Its military depends on U.S. aid. Its economy has been bailed out repeatedly by Western-backed institutions. Its political class is more fractured, more pliable. That makes it a convenient ally, even if it's an unreliable one. India, on the other hand, doesn't fit into that box. It's not desperate, it's not dependent, it engages on equal terms or not at all. And for a system built on control, that kind of confidence is threatening. This tension is not theoretical, it has consequences. It explains why India is often scrutinized more harshly than others, why its internal issues are amplified while larger human rights abuses elsewhere are ignored, why its neutrality is seen as betrayal while Pakistan's duplicity is treated as strategic nuance. It hurts, it angers, because the message is clear. If you're willing to follow orders, your sins will be forgiven. But if you walk your own path, every misstep will be magnified. Yet India doesn't flinch. It doesn't need validation to know its worth. It doesn't crave applause for acting in its national interest. It continues to build, to educate, to develop, to lead, not for praise, but for its people. And that is precisely why the West struggles with it. Because India stands as proof that democracy doesn't have to mean dependency, that moral conviction doesn't require foreign approval, that a nation can be global, open, plural, and still be fiercely sovereign. So if you're wondering why America appears to court Pakistan, why it ignores certain red flags while nitpicking others, look closer. It's not about values, it's about control. And India, in all its complexity, refuses to be controlled. That refusal is not arrogance, it's dignity. And in a world that still rewards obedience over integrity, dignity remains the greatest threat to the old world order. So now that you've seen the full picture, not just headlines, not just narratives, but the uncomfortable truths behind global alliances, ask yourself, what kind of world are we enabling when we reward instability and punish independence? When power is valued more than principle, and when those who stand alone for the right reasons are isolated, while those who play every side are embraced? This isn't just about India or Pakistan. This is about every country that dares to think for itself. It's about what happens when a nation refuses to be someone else's pawn. It's about whether we still believe in fairness or whether we've given up on that altogether in favor of expediency. So don't just scroll past. Don't just accept the next press statement at face value. Question what you're told. Study who benefits. Watch who gets silenced and who gets sponsored. And most importantly, support the voices and nations that are trying to walk the harder path, the path of principle, even when it's lonely. If this message resonates with you, share it. Start a conversation. Demand more from your leaders. And remember, integrity on the world stage is only possible when ordinary people like you stop accepting hypocrisy as diplomacy. We deserve better. The world deserves better. Let's be the ones who call it out.